Watching the Market Day Report, I'm Janet Adkison. While China commits to buying more American soybeans in day 2 of U.S.-China trade negotiations, but the details remain under wraps. RFD-TV's Sarah Mock breaks down the latest from the Oval Office sit-down between the two world powers. Good morning, Sarah.
Well, good morning, Janet. Well, yesterday was the end of that 3 days starting on Wednesday that the Chinese delegation was here in Washington having those high-level talks with U.S. negotiators trying to reach a deal before that March 1st deadline that's coming up and just at the end of this month as of today. We, of course, were watching as progress was made, apparently, as reported by both sides, on things like intellectual property rights, cyber theft, and, of course, the Chinese purchase of more U.S. ag, energy, and manufacturing products. The big commitment for U.S. agriculture was, of course, that China plans to immediately commit to buying 5 million additional tons of U.S. soybeans. Of course, we're still watching very closely about when and whether that will happen. The Chinese have, as Senator Grassley said earlier this week, not always been very firm on keeping their commitments, so a lot of folks will be keeping an eye on that moving forward. But we did hear from President Trump in the Oval Office yesterday after his sit-down with the Chinese vice premier, and he had some assurances for U.S. farmers and ranchers that their needs are still a top priority.
We won't have a deal if we don't open it up to the farmers, and we won't have a deal if they don't open it up to our manufacturers and just all of them. And I think China is very prone to do this.
Now, of course, those talks are still ongoing, and we are expecting straight from the president's mouth that he will be meeting with President Xi sometime later this month to finalize what he's calling one of the biggest deals ever. But we do expect to see Robert Lighthizer and other U.S. trade officials in Beijing in advance of that sometime in mid-February, though nothing has been finalized as of yet. Now, the White House did issue a statement earlier yesterday, kind of wrapping up those full talks, giving their perspective. And we did hear kind of a taste of that kind of cautious optimism from the White House that we've heard from lawmakers and officials throughout this process. The White House said that while progress has been made, much work remains to be done. President Trump has reiterated that the 90-day process represents a hard deadline and that U.S. tariffs will increase unless the U.S. and China make a satisfactory outcome by March 1st. Now, of course, that tariff increase, which was originally scheduled for the first of the year, was pushed off at last year's Buenos Aires conference of the G20. That is a significant increase that will go into effect on March 1st, according to the president, if an agreement isn't reached, though there does seem to be hope on both sides that that can be done. But we are still watching very closely, and of course we'll be watching markets this morning to see if we hear any confirmation about that 5 million tons of soybeans being purchased sometime in the very near future. Janet.
Well, thanks again for the update, Sarah. And of course, we're going to check back in with our D.C. Bureau at 11 Eastern this morning for additional updates on the China trade talks that are wrapping up in the nation's capital city. Well, as the purchase details continue.